You have been our hostess for the last month while we're staying here in Cuenca, Ecuador. And of course, we've relied on you for your information and knowledge about this place. You've lived here how long?
9 years.
9 years. And what brought you to Cuenca?
My ex-partner and I were living in Oaxaca, Mexico, where we had been for 7 years. Very interesting expat community for anyone that's interested. And it just felt like time to move on. So we met this couple who'd spent quite a lot of time in Ecuador, which had never been on the radar. And they said, you really should check it out. So I was looking online and found a couple of really cheap tickets to Quito, which was all that I knew. In those days, nobody knew about Guayaquil. And so I found these tickets to Quito, and we came for 3 weeks. Did something that we never do as independent travelers. We never hire a guide, but we were in a bar and found this guide. And he said, why don't I take you around for a week? Well, it was actually one of the best things we ever did. And so he took us, all around.
All around the country?
Well, when I say all around, I mean, we did the normal thing to Otavalo, down the Avenida de los Volcanes, and to Riobamba, Cuenca, Guayaquil, and then up through the beaches and back to Quito. And we spent 2 nights in Cuenca and realized that this was the place we wanted to move to. So we went back to Oaxaca, put our house on the market, and moved here within, I think, somewhere around 6 months.
And you have traveled pretty extensively. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about your background and where you started and some of the places that you've been and lived besides Oaxaca?
I was born in South Africa. From there, I went to Europe for 9 months, and then I went to Southeast Asia for a couple of years and back to Europe, and then to England, and I had lived in Toronto, and I can barely remember with the traveling that I've done. But
you mentioned Argentina.
Oh, and yes, and then drove throughout Central America and spent 3 years traveling through South America.
And so you have a pretty extensive knowledge of Latin America and experience in Latin America. What are some of the reasons that you actually chose Cuenca as a place to live long term?
Well, it became obvious to me that Oaxaca had water problems. We lived in the foothills of Oaxaca, and I needn't go into the story, but it was more and more difficult to get water there. And so I wanted a place that had water, where water was freely available and didn't have a water problem. And also I found that the older that I got, the less I wanted to live in a hot climate, and specifically a climate that was humid. I can take dry heat, but humidity is not where I want to go. So Cuenca seemed to have the perfect climate for me, and actually I still believe Cuenca has the perfect climate. Some people feel it's too cold, and it can get chilly, and one can also live in accommodation that is chilly. I have found that if you live in an apartment building, it's much warmer. So that's where I choose to live.
Well, and it's interesting, I didn't notice until this third trip to Cuenca that the buildings don't have any heating or air conditioning as part of it.
Not necessary.
And because the climate is so temperate.
Yeah, not necessary, really. I mean, not for me anyway.
What are some of the other things that you like about Cuenca? Many people have said many positive things, so I'm going to ask you positive and negative questions about it. But
well, I love the produce, the freshness of the veggies and the fruit and the meat in general. I mean, the food is very, very fresh here. and more so than Mexico, than where I was in Mexico anyway.
You gave us a tour of the market, the local market the other day, and we saw lots of great fresh vegetables, everything from avocados to squash, and of course a lot of fresh meat and things in the market. And that's fairly organic material, right?
Well, I don't know, because quite honestly, if you ask a vendor, is this organic, they're going to say yes. Mm-hmm. So I eat what at this age. I mean, if I'm not eating organic, I mean, maybe I'm going to preserve my life by 24 hours, and I'll just go for what's convenient.
So, and since you've been here, tell me about some of the things that you've done. I know you got involved in reviewing restaurants. Talk to me about that a bit.
Well, when we first came here, we rented from David Morrill, who was our next door neighbour, who used to do Gringo. He was the founder of Gringo Tree and Cuenca High Life,
which is a local publications on the internet now.
Yes, and also Cuenca Real Estate. So he was really a great help to us. And we were sitting one evening drinking some wine, and I guess, and in those days I would estimate that there were about 20 expats here, because there were literally a handful of us that would get together on a Friday night or whenever it was, and just in that first year that we were here, then it became 40, and then 60, and now it's about 4,000. Mm-hmm. But David asked me, because I'm actually a sterling cook, not that I like cooking anymore, but he asked me if I would start on some restaurant reviews. Well, I'd have to think back, but I would say that in those days there were about maybe a dozen places that one would eat at that wasn't comida típica, which is the typical food of this particular area. So that's how I started, and then as more gringos came, more restaurants opened.
And there were probably only, 400 or 500 gringos here at that time?
Well, when we came up, I don't know how many there were, but visually, I would say no more than 20. I never saw more than 20 gringos who were living here when we first came.
And this is a city with a population of approximately 500,000 or 600,000.
Right.
So, and so how did you find that experience, and how do the restaurants of the time compare to what's happening now?
Well, it's been exponential in terms of restaurant growth, and there's a good and a bad news around that. Let's see, what's the good news? The good news is that Cuenca has a lot more to offer. The standard of the food has really increased tremendously. I mean, there are some places which I would say are close to gourmet, if not gourmet, close to gourmet, which was definitely not available in the past. So that's the good news. Mm-hmm. The bad news is that a lot of people don't make it. Okay.
As far as the restaurant business, local people or expats going into the restaurant business. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are some of the things that you find difficult about living here?
Difficult?
Or challenging, at least.
Challenging. Well, challenging. There's very little that phases me. Okay, I'd say, perhaps the question should be what bugs me.
Okay.
I get bugged by the taxi drivers. Uh-huh. And
why is that?
they're always trying to make the extra, make the extra buck, not put their taxi meters on. And it seems to be isolated to Cuenca, where I've had these problems. Mm-hmm. You get in a taxi in Quito or Guayaquil, and it's just automatic. They put the meter on. You tell them where you're going. They put the meter on. You don't have to argue with these guys. Mm-hmm. And that's what bugs me.
Well, recently they just enacted a meter law, didn't they, that will probably help to resolve some of those kinds of issues?
Yes, I was very happy about that. Excuse me. The problem in Cuenca, and it actually extends nationwide, is that the taxi union and the bus drivers union are extremely strong here. They can halt mobility in this country if they went on a strike. So,
yeah, they have quite a bit of power then.
They have some power. And it took years for them to take notice of the pollution that they spewed out of the buses. They just refused to, do the necessary work.
I've been told that there's a turnover of the expatriates who come here to live, especially the American expatriates. About 1 in 4 people don't stay. Do you have any thoughts about that or any experience with people leaving? And if so, what would you recommend that they do before they come or while they're here to help adjust to overseas living?
Well, I just wrote to a friend of mine about this just yesterday, who is at an international living conference somewhere, I think Florida or something. I think there's a bit of desperation in the United States. People have had a hard time. People can't meet their commitments. They can't pay for their medical insurance or mortgages or whatever, so they latch onto the fact that they can live here cheaper. Mm-hmm. And that is a fact, but there are a lot of other factors to be noted.
So some are economic refugees and...
Well, I would say, the difference, I'll just tell you, the difference between the expats that come here and the expats that were in Oaxaca, Mexico, when I was there 9 years ago, was Oaxaca is a center for art and food and, it's a different kind of, it has a totally different vibe to Cuenca. And I would say that the majority of expats were there, but they were there because they wanted to live in Mexico. They wanted to live in Oaxaca, Mexico, and speak the language and enjoy the myriad things that Oaxaca had to offer. Here, I would say that isn't the case. And it isn't the case with the economic refugees.
Okay. And yet there are many people here who I've met just recently who are quite well off or, have very generous retirements or wealth. And why do you think they come here? Well,
a lot of people come for political reasons because
Sure.
they don't like what they see going on in the States politically, etc. I mean, we know, maybe they've already told you, why they have come here.
Mm-hmm. What recommendations do you have about preparing to live here and living here successfully?
I think it's really, really necessary for somebody to come here to do. To come here to check it out and stay for a few months, not just to get up and move, especially if you've never lived in a different culture. You're going to suffer from culture shock. And I had an experience when I met a woman that I travelled down to Vilcabamba with for a few days. And because she couldn't speak the language, she couldn't communicate with anybody other than having me translate for her all the time. And she had an incredibly high degree of frustration. And it was really interesting for me to look at this woman and go, she's not happy because she's frustrated. You know, how do I ask for this and how do I ask for that? So, I mean, not speaking, not understanding any of the language or not speaking any of the language is a decided hindrance.
So you'd recommend that people probably start learning something about the language before they come, and
yes, you don't need
something
to be,
about the culture.
You know, you don't need to be fluent, but you need to be able to ask for basic things or understand some basic things.
I've lived in a number of countries around the world and worked with expatriates, and one of the things that I find most conflicted for some people is that they try to turn the local culture into an American culture. Any comments for them?
Yes, absolutely. Forget about it. I mean, you know, you can't impose your American standards on another culture. You can't make them wrong for who they are. You are a guest in their culture. You need to adapt to their culture. They don't need to adapt to you.
Can you give me a couple of examples of what's different about, you know, Cuencan culture and say, you know, culture in Los Angeles or New York?
Or how about Argentina?
Or Argentina. Yeah. That's right, people. It's different in each of these countries, isn't it?
Well, actually, there's the Cuencana culture is different from the Quiteño and the Guayaquileño culture. I mean, the coastal culture is different from the mountain culture, and Cuenca is different from Quito, and the Cuencanas are very conservative. Very conservative.
Conservative in what way?
Their minds are not as, let's just put it, you know, I hate comparisons, but their minds are not as open. So if you're talking with Cuencanas, you don't want to talk about a religion other than Catholicism or, well, a lot of them are Christians now, or homosexuality or, you know, you just keep your, the conversation needs to be, is narrower, you know, because you don't want to offend them. And politics, I mean, you don't want to get into politics with Cuencanos. Yeah.
You mentioned homosexuality. I've met, since I've been here, quite a few couples who are homosexual couples who have come here to live. Do you have any comments or thoughts about that? Or
well, there aren't as many homosexuals here as there were in Oaxaca. And they're more accepted in that culture than they are in this culture. Homosexuality is very hidden. But I mean, you're talking about meeting gringo couples.
Gringos, yes. Gringos.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, homosexuality is hidden here amongst the locals.
Okay. Are there any other comments or suggestions or things you'd like to share about your life experience here or through travel with our audience?
You know, I don't mix a lot with the new expats that come here, but I have been party to Americans acting in an ugly Americans. Well, what can I say around that? You know, I think if you're going to be ugly, you're going to be ugly. I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I was going to mention that I was told a story just recently about a woman in Super Maxi who was complaining very loudly that the clerks didn't speak English.
Yes, no, I've heard that. I've heard that a lot, you know, and that's just pure ignorance.
Yeah.
That's pure ignorance.
Okay.
It's like you know. Anyway, that's okay.
time to grow up.
That come and do the exploration, and then decide if you can live here happily or not.
So renting is pretty reasonable here, isn't it? And pretty available.
Well, you know, it depends. It depends. If you live in Gringo, what is the area known as Gringolandia, you're going to pay more than if you live in other areas.
Okay.
And that's a fact.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for being a great, gracious hostess during our stay here, and hope that we'll get to visit Cuenca again soon, and also get to see you in the future. And thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for the interview.
Okay.